What's going on, guys? Jesse here from Sledaddicz, and today I'm going to be bringing you my end of season review on this 2025 MXZ XRS 850 Turbo R competition package. Let's get into it.
Sledaddicz is brought to you by Team Vincent Motorsports, Bergstrom Carbides, Ledger Performance, Ultimax Belts, Stud Boy Studs, and Radio World.
So the first thing I assume everyone is curious about and wants to know about is this 850 Turbo R motor. So what do I think of it? So currently I have 5,400 kilometers on this sled this season, and I can't say enough good things about this motor. I absolutely love it. Off the line, the sled compared to a regular 850 that I had last year is significantly more peppy down low. Through the mid-range, you're at 100 and you squeeze the throttle and it just gets up and goes, which is very different to the non-aspirated 850. On top of that, in terms of just general corner-to-corner whole shot, this sled, this motor set up like it is absolutely fantastic. Another question I get asked a lot about is regarding the ice fluid. So what does the ice fluid do and how does it affect the handling of the sled? So I can tell you there have been many days I've ridden this season where I've ran out of ice a third of my way or half of my way through my day because I was riding super hard, and it's sometimes even in warmer conditions, and you run out of ice. What does that do to the performance of the sled? So for 99% of people riding this sled without ice, you're not going to notice a difference. What it is when you're holding the throttle all the way down, or you're to the pin down a lake or on a straightaway somewhere, after a certain amount of time, the motor is going to want to inject the ice fluid in order to keep the turbo cool or to keep the temperature down. If the ice fluid isn't there, it will eventually retard the timing. So what I've seen, for example, I just got back from my New Brunswick trip, and before that a 7-day Gaspé trip. So I was riding the sled for 11 days straight. And what I noticed is when I ran out of ice, my top end dropped by about 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. And that's because in order to get to top end, you got to hold that throttle wide for 15, 20 plus seconds. So off the line, every time you squeeze the throttle, whether you have ice or you don't, you're still going to get full power, or at least that's what I found. It's really only when you get to the top end and you've been holding it for 10, 20 or more seconds. So what I noticed, this sled top speed, the fastest I've seen on the gauge is 184 kilometers an hour. That same day that I saw 184 kilometers an hour, when I ran out of ice, I saw 171. Same condition, same type of trail. It was hard packed trail. It had warmed up the day before and then frozen, and it was groomed, so it was nice hard packed trail, kind of like the best conditions to get top speed. And that's what I saw, about a 13 to 14 kilometer an hour discrepancy. That being said, for guys worried about taking this type of sled or an 850 turbo on a saddlebag trip because you don't want to carry ice, you don't need to carry ice. If you run out of ice, you can still run the sled without it. The motor protects itself. The electronics in it won't let you overheat it. That's how the whole system works. So yeah, when it wants to inject ice, it will try. If it can't, it will retard the timing. It does not affect the performance of the sled during regular riding. It's really just when you're holding it wide for long periods of time. In terms of reliability, I'm only keeping this sled for one season, and so we have the past few years, so it's hard for me to comment. But in the 5,400 kilometers I've had on this sled, the motor hasn't had a hiccup. There have been a couple times where I've had some choking, or like where I'm holding the throttle wide and the motor will drop RPM for a second. And all of those times have been because of bad gas. So that's the thing that I've noticed, especially with the 850 turbos, is they're very sensitive to fuel. And if you stop at a gas station and the gas station doesn't have the best premium gas, the motor will feel it and you'll notice it. That being said, when I was just in New Brunswick, I noticed the same thing. So I filled up at an Esso in town, just assuming it was going to be good gas, and I had some choking on the trail. Then I stopped at a Shell gas station. I got premium fuel from Shell. Not to say Shell's better, but in this case, it was. And as soon as I filled the tank with the Shell gas, after that, it didn't have a hiccup the rest of the day. So these sleds, the 850 turbos, are particularly sensitive to premium fuel, which isn't surprising. But in regards to reliability, the motor has been flawless. One big thing that changed for this year on the two-stroke models from Skidoo was the front end. So on this sled, I have the Raz RX front end, which is an upgrade from the previous year's Raz X, as well as the Pilot RX skis. So what do I think of them and how do they handle? So the Raz RX is noticeably a flatter handling front end. So going corner to corner, this sled wants to stay planted, much more so than I felt the Raz X did last year. In regards to the Pilot RX skis, so this is an interesting topic. I think it really depends on the conditions you're riding in. In softer conditions where there's a little bit of fresh snow on the trail or there's been a warm up and it's a little bit sloppy, these RX skis are unbelievable. They stay planted and they go exactly where you point them versus the Pilot X's, which would push a little bit and you kind of slide around the trail and not hold the line. These RX skis hold the line perfectly in soft conditions. That being said, there is a little bit of a drawback I find when it comes to hard pack conditions. So when the trail's super tight in the morning after a fresh groom and it's been cold overnight, you get heavier steering with these skis just because it's a much more aggressive design. So the keel is a much deeper and wider keel to the previous Pilot X skis, and you'll notice that in harder pack conditions. That being said, I still love this ski, and this is the ski that I would choose to ride on this or to run on this sled. But is something to note, and that's why I believe for 2026, Skidoo opted to keep the Pilot X skis on the 900s, just because the four strokes have a little bit more weight on the front ski. So the last thing you want is even more ski pressure from the Pilot RX skis. Going back to the motor, one other thing I wanted to mention that I've absolutely been loving this season is shot starter. So exactly as it's mentioned in Skidoo's advertisements and by other people, I pull this sled once in the morning and I do not have to pull it ever again until the next morning. Even if I stop for lunch for an hour or two, I put my key back on, lift up the kill switch, hold the start button, and it cranks every single time. So that in itself is awesome. I was even surprised, especially at the beginning of the season, like running the sled for a couple minutes, 2 minutes maybe, turning it off, and then going to turn it back on, and that shot starter still works. So definitely super cool. I personally don't feel the need for the electric starter. The pulling once a day is what it is. That's what you get with shot starter, but you also get the weight advantages of not having the electric starter, which makes the 850 turbo the same weight as the regular 850. It is important to note, so with the shot starter, you still have a battery in the sled. It's not a full-size battery like you get with the electric start sleds, but it is a much smaller battery, which my understanding is to run the gauge. And so for us, as you know, we've always run our Garmin units on the glove box extension on these sleds, and we hardwire it to the solenoid. This year, because this sled doesn't have an electric starter, there is no solenoid, but we wire it directly to the small battery in the back, and it's been working flawlessly all season. Going into the GPS setup, the one issue I did have this year that I've been having in the past is with BRP Go. So BRP Go is a fantastic app. I think the app is one of the best snowmobile navigation apps we have. You can see all the different provinces and states connected together on the app and where the trails connect across the border, which is super cool. Planning trips on it, sharing rides, all of that works great. Me personally, the issue I have is when it comes to the connection with the sled. Yes, this year with BRP Go and the module that you can get on previous model sleds and that came on this sled, you do have some built-in GPS functionality without plugging in your phone. But specifically here in Ontario, the only way to see the Ontario trails on the map or on your gauge is by plugging in your phone. So the first ride this season, I plugged in my phone for BRP Go and it worked the whole morning. And then around 100 kilometers into the day, it started disconnecting randomly and saying like, connection failed or not connected to device, and I had to unplug and replug it back in. And then by day 2, it was like really not working. And then weirdly enough, on my last trip, I was getting no power out of that outlet at all. So it could be a faulty USB plug, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I always come back to the same thing. We love our Garmins, and it's super convenient for us because we just take them from sled to sled. And I will still always get this premium gauge because I love the way the gauge works, the way it looks, being able to see my music on there, all my stats and all the details there. I just personally don't use it for BRP Go. If BRP Go was built into the gauge and had the mapping, I would probably use it, but I would still use my Garmin. I don't think I'm going to be going away from the Garmin for a while. Another new thing for this year, which I thought was awesome and really shows that BRP is listening to their customers, is what they did with the handlebar switchgear. So one of the big complaints last year was that the thumb warmers and the handlebar warmers were the same button and you couldn't separate one from the other. So that's been updated. If you have an older sled, that's a software update. It came stock on the 25s. And what that allows you to do is basically with the heated thumb button, if you click it once, that adjusts your handlebar. You click it again, that adjusts your thumb warmer. That works well. I think something which I've been saying for years, and it just is what it is. I don't know why, but I find that the sensitivities on the handlebar warmers and thumb warmers are all over the map. So I could have it on a couple settings, like on 3 out of 10 or 3 out of 8, and it will be burning my hand off, and then I turn it off, and then I turn it to 1 and it's burning my hand off. So I find that the sensitivities on it are not the best, but they do work well. I have never had cold hands while riding. I always have the handlebar warmers and the thumb warmers working. Just sometimes I cycle them on and off just because they get really hot. So the last thing I want to talk about regarding this sled is the suspension. So how does this sled handle through the bumps? No surprise, R-Motion X rear suspension handles unbelievably through the moguls. If there's like a 1.5 foot chop, I can just skip right over the top of them and hardly even feel it. Normal trail chatter, it's like nothing for this skid. Paired with the Pro 40 Kashima coated up front, this sled handles like a dream through moguls. It's the ideal sled for the hard trail rider that wants to pound moguls when there are moguls on the trail. And so I love it. So the big question comes, what would I get for next year? Would I get another XRS? Would I get an XRS competition package 850 turbo? Would I go back to a non-aspirated 850? So for me personally, I don't think I could ever go back to an 850. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but after having the turbo and the power you have, just riding my buddy's 850 and going back and forth, I think I'm an 850 turbo guy for life. In regards to what sled I get next year, you'll have to stay tuned for that, but I appreciate you guys watching this video and staying up to date with our content this season. If you have any questions on this sled, feel free to leave a comment below, or you can email me at jesse@sledaddicz.com. Always happy to help. Thanks for watching, everyone. We will see you next season.